I'm Doug Fernan. This is my take on music recording. Talk about a life in music. Obie O'Brien has done many things in his musical career, starting with playing drums when he was 12, to building a basement studio in the 1960s, to owning a sophisticated studio in Philadelphia, and now, for over 30 years, working with Jon Bon Jovi in many capacities. I first met Obie in the early 1970s at my studio. We hit it off right away with our similar approach to music and recording. But we lost touch for a couple of decades. Now, Obie lives not too far from me and has built a wonderful studio for his own projects, where he works with up-and-coming artists. For the last year, Obie has been home during the pandemic. Previously, he was touring with Bon Jovi almost all the time. This has given us much more time to hang out, listen to what each of us is working on, and for Obie to tell me about the amazing work he is doing, like remixing many songs by Motown artists from the 1960s. This is the first of two parts of our long conversation, in which we talk about those topics and a whole lot more. I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about your early musical experiences.
Well, I was lucky enough to grow up in a house with music. My father had a 24-piece band. So I grew up early on with Stan Kenton and Benny Goodman and Glenn Miller. I heard all the big band stuff and a lot of the jazz records. And my father had a record store where I grew up in the 50s. So I would get a lot of records, especially 45s, when new records would come out, Elvis and Little Richard and everything. I don't know if you remember, but there was a discount chain called E.J. Corvettes.
Oh, sure.
And when they opened up, it basically put my father out of business. Because, my father would have 10 singles. E.J. Corvettes would have 50,000. So they were selling it, cheaper than he could buy it from the distributors. But it was a great couple years where he had that record store. And just being able to peruse through all that vinyl back then, 45s. And he had a little card. And if you bought so many records, he would punch it. And then if you bought like 10 records, you got one for free. And a guy who I ended up being partners with a commercial studio in Philadelphia, Lance Quinn, used to come to my father's store and buy records, before the big discount stores opened. And then later on, Lance and I ended up playing in a band together, partners together, and working on records together. So it was early on. There was always music. There were 4 record players in my parents' house. My father had a KLH component set upstairs. There was one in one of the other bedrooms. There was a big Capitol record player downstairs. It was basically furniture, but each one of the cabinets had 2 12-inch woofers, a mid-range, and a couple tweeters. It was loud. I remember it was loud, and we used to go up and buy Beatle records and come back and listen to that until, my parents threw us out. And then we'd go to my buddy Hugh McDonald's house and listen to the Beatle albums over and over again till his parents threw us out. So early on, I was listening to music. I started playing drums when I was 12 because my father was a drummer originally. So the drums were in the house, so they were free. So that's why he became a drummer. And then, it went from there. I played in bands in Philly and outside of Philly. I did the club scene back in the day, which was great. Played in down the shore in New Jersey in the summers. It was the best time of my life. You didn't really make much money, but it was the greatest time ever. Working till 3 a.m, getting done, then going to the Court Diner, or one of the diners, and you'd eat and you'd be there till 5, and then you go play cards till 7 or 8, and you go to bed around 9 a.m. It was the greatest time ever. my father had bought a Sony tape recorder that had sound on sound. Now, he never used it. We used to record his band. He would set up a couple mics. But as I read the instruction booklet and found that I could record on one track, play it back, and record to the other track, I went, oh, I get it. I see how this works. So I went to the public library and I took out a couple books about recording and recording studios and how they were built and how they worked. And at the time, the books were fairly old. They weren't up to date very much. So they were talking about mono machines mostly, one or two stereos. But I read a book about how you build a recording studio and how you isolate things. And I built a studio in my parents' basement. I built a drum booth that I stapled the underpad, like from a carpet, that brown, ugly, whatever it was made out of. I stapled that all over the wall. And then I made a little vocal booth next to where the heater was in my parents' basement on the other side. So I had a rudimentary understanding how multi-track recording worked, because I would have the band come in and I would put 2 microphones in that drum booth, and then the guitar player would play, the bass player would play, and they'd have their amps, and I would set up a couple mics with a Lafayette mixer, if you remember them. It had a 9-volt battery in it, so it was high-end stuff. I think it cost like $8 when we bought them. And then I would listen back, and you would go, God, this is awful. Like the bass is missing or the bass is way too loud. So you would figure that out, right? You would have them come in multiple times, and you would figure out, this guy had to turn way down. This guy had to turn up. So I would put the rhythm track down, and then I would record horns and vocals on the other track. And again, it was trial and error, and it was a lot of error, but it gave me that understanding about how to capture the moment. It may not have been sonically great because the microphones were mics that came with the Sony tape recorder. They were dynamic mics, and they were probably $10 a piece. And then you used whatever mic pre was in the tape recorder, which was probably $10 also. But it was a great place to start for me because the light bulb comes on. I don't know how you first started, but you remember there was that point where the light bulb came and you went, oh, I get this. And you realized the studios you saw in the books, they were doing the same thing, just on a much higher level with better equipment. But the basic premise of it was the same. It was to capture that thing that you loved, that magic of people playing together. And at that time, everybody played together. It wasn't like now where you put a click track down and you put a reference piano track down and a vocal, and you send it out, and a drummer wherever, anywhere around the world, puts a drum part on, sends it back to you, and then you can have a bass player come in, or you send it to a bass player. That's probably my least favorite way to record. When you're making eye contact with the players, and you can see when it happens, the magic, that thing where they just lock in, and you go, there, now push record. So I still, to this day, love everybody in a room as much as you can, playing as many things as you can. All the records that I love, the early R&B records and even the big band records and the Beatle records, they were playing live. I remember I don't know if you remember the Swinging Blue Jeans. They did a song called Hippie Hippie Shake. And they recorded their whole record, all 10 or 12 songs, whatever it was, in an 8-hour day. Come in, and they took a break for lunch. They were at the canteen. But there was something about that magic, everybody playing together. To this day, that's my favorite way to do it. It's just more and more difficult.
Yeah. Well, the sum is greater than the parts when you do that.
Yes, absolutely.
Because everybody reacts to how other people are playing, and when it starts sounding good, everybody gets enthusiastic. It's a totally different experience than the way a lot of records are made today. And I do the same thing. I want everybody there, as many people as possible, on that rhythm track.
Well, and the other thing besides, having that visual connection, they're listening in the headphones, but now they have this visual thing, and they're sort of watching each other how they do it. Once they get into that groove, people come up with ideas, and they'll go, hey, they'll say, why don't you try this? Why don't we try this in this measure? Why don't we cut this in half? And that's when I love it, because I try to hire really good players. I like to work with really good players. So they have this wealth of experience and ideas, and why not take advantage of it? I've never been like, you got to do it this way. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to do it this way, and we're not going to change anything. I'm all for people smarter than me coming up with great parts and great ideas, because then you look like a genius.
Yeah, it makes your job easy.
It makes your job easier, and people go, wow, what a great job. But it's a team effort. It's a group effort. Everybody, we're all trying to get to the same place. And the players want it to be great, and they want it to sound great, and they want the magic to happen. So you find those group of people, and you realize you use them all the time because you're comfortable with them. They understand your approach to making the records, and I don't mean just the physical act of recording, but what you like to hear structure-wise, and then you don't have to say that much. They're coming up with their own thing and their own ideas, but they know the basic window that you want everybody to work inside of. And that, when you find these great players, it's, there's people I use over and over again. And I've been very lucky to work with great musicians over the years. Really lucky.
Yeah, that really makes a huge difference in, your personal satisfaction with the project. And, there's another thing that I notice happens in a situation like that, and that is when they're playing, somebody might just stop and say, hey, what was that you just did? Do that some more. That was really good.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You can never get that if you have everybody playing separately.
That's right. And I love that, because somebody will have this great idea. I just finished a girl's album, and and it happened multiple times, especially the drummer I used, Graham Hawthorne. He and the bass player, Jay Bratton, would look at each other, and then they would just start throwing stuff back and forth to each other. And, at that point, I just get out of the way. Just get out of the way. You've got these great musicians with this wealth of talent and great history of recording how many albums. And they bring all this stuff to the table. Take advantage of it, man. Don't try to crush it. Take advantage of it, because if it comes out great, everybody goes, wow, you're a genius. And you go, yes, I am. And the thing that you're a genius about is hiring the right people and getting out of the way. Don't be a moron. Get out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So you eventually ended up as a studio owner.
Yeah.
Tell me about that experience.
Well, every time somebody would come up to me and go, hey, I'm building a studio, I never know whether to say congratulations or I'm really sorry, because it's an expensive undertaking. I mean, you've been there. And then when I built the studio in Philadelphia back in the 80s, it was my partner, Lance Quinn, and I, and we were the two musical guys, and we had another partner that was, the business side of it, I knew we were going to get a lot of people that would come to work with Lance and work with me. But we didn't have that much money to build the place. So we were sort of trying to figure a way to get this thing done, have it be as amazing as we wanted it to be, but do it within a limited budget. And in the beginning, I went to a lot of musicians that were also construction workers. And I said, do you want to trade off your labor and time for time in the studio? And most of them said, yeah, so I did that. And it was a large building, so it was a big undertaking. We're working with a bunch of like leftover hippies, right, building the studio. And one day I got a visit from the Carpenters Union, and it was not a fun time. I will say that. So that was the first sort of kick in the nuts at that point. But and it's a great thing. Building a studio to me is as much fun creatively as making a record, because you're going, we're going to take this wall, we're going to curve it around there. But every day, somebody would come up to you, and I'd go, everything all right? They go, yeah, but. Every day there was that but. So I got tired of hearing the but. But that is just the way it goes. And then when you're a studio owner, so the phone calls come in and they go, hey, do you have a Studer 24-track? And you go, no. And they go, okay. And they hang up. And then you buy a Studer tape recorder. And they call up and they go, hey, do you have an SSL console? And you go, no. And they hang up. And the next, do you have a Neve console? And you go, no. And they hang up. It is chasing your tail, trying to keep up with what is the hot new thing in the business. Unless you're a billionaire, you cannot do it. And the thing I always loved, I'm a huge fan of Joe Tarsia, which everyone will know, at Cameo Parkway at Sigma Sound. And I love that guy. And he was kind enough to come here to my home when I put my home studio together. And I just got, and he said, I can only stay for an hour, until he met my wife, the other Italian, and she started making food, and he was here all day. But I talked to him about making those great records and how he put those personnel together. But the thing I loved about him, and we talked about just what we were talking about, how do you keep up with the Joneses as far as equipment? What I loved, if you remember, in Billboard, they would have the studio glossary, Northeast, and it would have all these studios. And everybody would put, I've got an SSL 4000, I got Studer tape recorders, I've got the greatest microphones. Joe Tarsia, you went to his and it said, Sigma Sound, clean bathrooms. It was the greatest thing ever. Because
he talked about that, Obie. He talked about that in that interview I did with him.
Yep. But to me, I remember seeing that in the magazine and going, I didn't know him at the time, but I said, I love this guy because he was all about capturing the performance. At the end of the day, your job is to capture the magic. And you don't have to have the absolute best equipment ever made to do it.
That's right.
I mean, I think it's great if you do, but, who is able to do that? And again, what we're supposed to do is capture the magic. However you do it, there's no set way to do it. The window of acceptability is large in that arena. However you make it happen, you make it happen. But owning a studio was fatiguing to me because, I'd go in there at 10 in the morning and leave at 2 in the morning, 7 days a week. And I'd write myself a paycheck for $100. I'm like, man, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. Then the other thing is you take yourself out of the marketplace. When you have a studio, you can't go, oh, I'm going to go out. I'm going to the West Coast. I'm going to work out there for a month. I got a project. You can't do that. You've made a commitment to your partners and to the bank people that you borrowed money from. So you have to stay there and make that work. And, there were those days that I went, this is the greatest job ever. Like we had bands rehearse for the original Live Aid. I have Led Zeppelin in my room. And you go, there's Jimmy Page right there. Those days are magic. I got to do we did a lot of rock bands, and it was fun. It was fun. But then there were those other days where, you got to a point and you took in work that you would never do, but you had to keep the lights on. You had to pay your staff. You had to pay the insurance. You had to pay your rent. You had to pay your electric. And again, every day it's something. Like every day I had to deal with the electrostatic air filters in my 4 air conditioning units. And every day one of them would screw up. I remember Lance and I, when it just got unbearable. And over like a month period, we had clients come in that I never would have wanted to work for. And when you had one of them in between something that you love, you can deal with it. But when you have a slew of them back to back, where you just feel like, you're digging a ditch somewhere, you're not doing anything creative. And it's, no matter what you do, there's only so much polishing you can do to a turd, as they say. I remember saying, we're done. We're cooked. And we sold the place. And I remember at that point in my life, I had like one credit card left that was maxed out. I had one car, and we're just sitting on the stoop, Lance and I. And I'm like going, Jesus, I'm like 40 years old. What do I do now? Do I start over again? Because, like I said, you're out of the network. You were a studio owner. It doesn't matter. Nothing else matters. Engineer, producer, doesn't matter because you can't go do any of that. You're a studio owner. You got to come in. And you know what? You got to go check. Is there toilet paper? Is there hand towels in the kitchen? Is there soap there? Jesus, on and on. But I'm looking at my partner going, what are we going to do now? And you know what he said? He goes, let's go to Graceland and see Elvis's house. Oh, it sounds great to me, because he still had his airplane. And between the two of us, we were able to get enough fuel in that thing to fly down to Graceland. So that's what we did. We were out of the studio business. I went to Graceland. And then I didn't, at that point, I didn't give a crap what happened in the future. I figured something will happen. Maybe I'll go to Sears and sell wallpaper and paint. But something would happen. So, and you know what it's like going in a studio. There are days where it's not very much fun.
No, I always used to say what finally drove me out of the studio business was when I did just one too many session where I was better at what I did than anybody in the room was at what they did. And
yes.
You just can't do that for very long. And, sustain your enthusiasm. And, Obie, there was the day I realized it was time to close the doors was when people would ask my opinion and I'd give them my honest answer.
Ooh, that's
you
gonna
can't
hurt.
do that as a studio owner.
Nope.
I just had enough.
Yeah, the roof is leaking. The toilet's clogged up. I don't give a crap anymore, And you and I both had studios in a time where there was money in the music business. People were recording. I had clients, big clients. They would book my studio, and they wouldn't show up for a week and a half. I'm charging them every day because your studio is empty. And the other thing was, I used to have the guys that were the interns at my studio. I'd say, look, when you're done just straightening stuff up and putting the mic microphones back in the cables, vacuum all the cocaine and crank off of the console, off the title strips where they're, doing lines. I'm like, just clean it up. You would have somebody come in and do a line of crank, and you look at them and they're mashing their teeth and their eyes are spinning like pinwheels, and I'm drinking Jolt Cola because I know I'm going to be there for 20 hours punching in guitar parts. That gets old pretty quick also.
Yeah. Yeah, but it was nice. It was nice when you had a record label that booked a month to do an album.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I was, if they weren't ready to cut something or was a break in the project, I'd say, you mind if I bring some other work in here while you're, he said, yeah, sure, go ahead. And, as long as we didn't have anything set up. And so that was pretty good. That was nice to have that guaranteed income, at least for, that month.
Well, we also, look, it was a lot of work, but we had a lot of fun. I had a great group of people in there working. And one of the guys that I took in, like off the street, is named Nick Dedea, who's now a very well-known producer-engineer. And Nick came to me right out of the Air Force. His brother, Mark Dedea, was the program director at IOQ, the rock station. And he called me up and he said, listen, can you give my brother a job? I know you probably can't pay him much, but just can you maybe show him the ropes and, maybe he's going to be great at this. And he came and he would talk to my partner and I, and he would be yes, sir, no, sir, which really creeped us out because I'm like, unless you're Elvis, you can't talk to us that way. And he would stand behind us because he wanted to see what was happening. And my partner, Lance Quinn, would always go, why is this guy hovering over me? Make him stop hovering over me. I go, Nick, stop hovering over. And he'd go, okay. And he would go away for a while and then come back. But Nick became this amazing engineer, and we would talk about it, and he would ask questions, and we would go in. I'd say, come on out here. I'm going to mic this acoustic instrument. And I go, look, the microphone's probably going to be around here, but I would always get down on my knees and listen to the instrument. I'd have them play. Let me hear where the magic is happening, because it's different on every instrument. And he became so good, and now he's got a studio in Australia, and I actually saw him in 2019. We toured Australia, and he came to the shows, a couple shows with his daughter, and it was great to see him. And we email back and forth, and we'll send each other stuff that we're working on, or we'll talk about equipment. So seeing the few people that stayed in the business that worked for me, that's great, because it's just like I'm doing here with these artists. Now I have a studio that isn't a business. It is my playtown, and I work with artists that I really like and I think are talented, and they're all broke. Nobody has any money, but they're learning the craft here. When we're out on tour, I let them come and follow me around, and they watch how a top-level organization does things. They're learning more than they're ever going to learn anywhere else. So they're not just learning about the process of putting a song together and why this works and why this doesn't work and what equipment are you using and all that. I'm trying to give them the overall, the big picture, and I enjoy that. That's fun for me, especially when I see them go out and do stuff. You go, wow, there you go.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. Well, that sort of leads us into, and maybe there's some other steps along the way, but your relationship with Jon Bon Jovi, how did that come about?
I was doing projects for his cousin, Tony Bon Jovi, who owned the power station,
right,
which was one of the mythical, recording studios in the late 70s and 80s. And when I tell you, everybody recorded there. I remember being upstairs And downstairs, the Rolling Stones were in one room and Springsteen was in another room. You'd be in the I was in the bathroom there on the lobby floor. If you remember it, there was a bathroom as you come up the stairs, and I'm in there taking a leak. I look over, there's Bob Dylan. I'm like, Bob Dylan. And, you just saw everybody there. And it was that big live room. And the guy that really made that thing happen was Ed Evans. And he was the head technician there. But that guy is brilliant. He's a genius. And he made that happen. So I'm working there, and he hires his second cousin. He's like, hey, my second cousin comes in, help him out, teach him the ropes. I'm like, great. And Jon was truly the go get food, sweep up the place. I mean, he was the grunt. He truly was. He was 18 years old, and he and I got to be very good friends. And, he was constantly writing, constantly asking people, do you want to write? Do you want to do this? And he had more drive. I mean, focus drive. Like, I loved playing in a band when I was his age, but he was thinking way beyond playing at a club in Asbury Park. And we just became fast friends. And I'll tell you this. When I told you I was that story, I was sitting on the stoop of my studio that wasn't mine anymore. I was 40, and we were getting ready to go down to see Elvis's house because I wanted to see the red and orange shag carpet. And I was building a studio for Jon in his home in Rumson, New Jersey at the time. So I'm up there having dinner with he and Dorothea, and he's like, what are you going to do, man? I go, I don't know. Maybe I'll work at a shoe store. I don't know. And he was basically, look, you're going to come with me full time. Don't worry about it. And that was the entire conversation. And never money, never spoken. I mean, I'll tell you this. I get up every day of my life and I look around and I go, thank you, Jon Bon Jovi. I will never be able to repay his kindness, ever. Not in a million years. I'm just some mook from, outside of Philadelphia. But when you travel with Jon and you go somewhere and you talk to somebody, they figure you're somebody because you're with him. So people that wouldn't give you the time of the day, they're like putting their arm around you. Hey, can I buy you a drink? But again, I have been there for a long time, and you don't stay working with any organization or person for money for this long. It's because you admire them, you respect them, and it's like I watch how he works and how he treats people, and the amount of kindness and charity he has shown to Philadelphia over the years.
Yeah, it's amazing.
With Sister Mary and Project Home and the Jon Bon Jovi Soul Foundation housing units. And, he has those restaurants, the Soul Kitchen, where you can go with your family, even if you don't have money, and have some dignity and eat a wonderful meal and not have to worry about paying for it. This is the guy. He's the guy. And everybody in the band, they become your family. I was thinking about it the other day. This is the longest I've ever been home, or longest I've ever been in the United States for this long since like 1987, which is pretty amazing. You get to work and tour and make records with the most amazing organization. The thing is, I'm the lamest guy in this organization. Everybody else is amazing. Like, I wake up, I go, man, one of these days they're going to find out, and I'm going to be, you've been here for 36 years. What do you do? I go, oh, I don't want that question to come up. When I think about that, every one of those rotten sessions that you and I used to do, they all sort of disappear because what's happened since then has been so amazing. And you know what, Doug? I was thinking about it the other night when I knew we were going to talk today. I bet you I have worked in 150 studios around the world. I worked at Bop. Do you remember that place they built in Africa? I worked at Bop. I've worked multiple times at Abbey Road. I've been power play in Switzerland. I've been, Japan, Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore. I could go on and on. I've worked at studios everywhere around the world. It's just crazy the amount of places I've been able to go. And, like I said, I'm a mook from Philly who's an Eagles fan. And then it's like, here I am.
I don't think you'd be there, Obie, if you didn't have something going for you. So don't sell yourself short.
Here's the thing, Doug. His children love me. My wife and I watched those children, all of them, from when they were tiny. If John and Dorothea had to go somewhere, we were watching the kids, or the kids would come down to my house. And we just had the best time hanging out with the kids. It's just been an amazing ride. And the thing is, it's not over. We're still going.
Well, outline some of the things you do. I mean, you seem like you're just involved in every aspect of that organization, but I'd like to hear, what those things entail.
Well, I will say this. The great thing about this organization is everybody gets to have a say. I mean, everybody gets to say their piece or what they think. Now, it may not go anywhere, but you're a part of it. So you go, why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? But basically, I think artists like John, who want people to be straight with him, if something's not great, you can go, you know what? That's not great. Everything else we're doing is great. Can we make that better? And that's what he wants to hear. He wants somebody to, tell him the temperature. And so basically, all the live captures I do most of the studio recordings. We have a massive tape locker, which right now that I'm involved in archiving, transferring all those tapes to digital format. But you sort of end up doing a little bit of everything. That's what the people that have been in the organization the longest, you do. You do a little bit of everything. When my shop was rolling, I worked on John's cars. I worked on the guys' cars. I had a hot rod shop here at my house. So that was fun. I loved that. But, that's the kind of thing you do. You work on the cars, you make records, you fix stuff in the studio. I got to design both of the studios, the one in his original house and the one that we built on the estate in Red Bank, which was just this big, amazing, cool room, big live drum room. And it was great. And you would be up there and you look out the windows and you're looking out at this rolling estate to the Navesink River, which is the Atlantic Ocean. And you go, man, this is living. And then, like I'll complain about touring and my wife will be like, oh, boo-hoo, I'm so sad for you because you're flying on a private jet staying at the best hotels around the world. She has a point. So, sometimes you need a big cup of shut up. But, we wouldn't be us if we weren't bitching about something. But at the end of the day, I have gotten to work for an amazing group of people, musicians who I respect, who I think are great at what they do. And I have been lucky enough to see it from the highest perch because, you're touring with a band that just, tours. It's past A1, whatever is past that, whatever the next letter before A1 is, and that's what it is. And he always has great, great people in every spot. So, you hope they don't find out about you when you're me.
So did you produce or co-produced a lot of his songs?
he's had a great collection of producers over the years. He likes bringing in different people. And a lot of times those producers will bring in their own engineer. So you sort of end up splitting the engineering work, which is great for me because I get to hang out and not have to do a lot of work. And I'm always interested in doing that. But he and I have done. I got to produce the box set. I got to produce the different records, and the one that I always loved was for the. There was a double CD of the 2 Room songs of Elton John and Bernie Taupin, and we did Leave On. Did it at the little studio that we built for just a demo studio at his house in Rumson. The piano was upstairs in the living room. It took every microphone cable I had to get from the piano down to 2 inputs on the console, but also run a lineup for the headphones. I had no microphone cables left, but it was great. You have to go disconnect the doorbell, turn all the phones off, but it was just great. And the live stuff, I always get to produce the live stuff, like Live at Wembley, 1995, and from Hyde Park. When you stand on the stage and you look out and there's 160,000 people, you go, wow, this is unbelievable. And I've had a ton of those. This is unbelievable. How many Wembley stadiums we did. I think we played 12 O2 shows one year. We just stayed in London, and we did one after the other. You would drive down to the Thames, and you'd get in a boat and go up the Thames to the O2. And you go, this is unbelievable. So, I've gotten to engineer a lot of the stuff, produce some stuff, and it's been great.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, you deserve it, believe me.
Well, I don't know if anybody deserves this level of luck, but, it has been, I figure we're just going to keep going till we're all dead.
Yeah, what else will we do?
That's the thing. What else are we going to do, Doug?
Yeah.
Are you going to retire? It's never going to happen.
Nah.
I know you. You're going to keep, coming up with designs for the great equipment that you design, and you're going to keep recording because I've talked to you and I know you love it. You and I have swapped mics just to listen to each other's microphones. It's a great thing, and you have been kind enough. I send stuff to you and I go, tell me what you think. Give me your honest opinion. And I know you'll give me your honest opinion. And there's not a lot of people I do that with. But, we're very similar, I think, in our approach to the love of the craft and the love of music. And, the one thing I've learned with working with artists all these years is everyone has a different definition of success. I've worked with people that just the fact that a song that they gave birth to ends up being recorded, it doesn't have to go anywhere. Just having that thing come to life where they can play it over a set of speakers, that's success for them. And then other people, success is, playing in front of 150,000 people. And then all the other ones fill in the gaps from left to right, and I get both ways about it. Like with Bon Jovi, when we do these huge shows, they're just unbelievable. And then we'll go and we'll play like a semi-acoustic, talk to people, answer some questions, play some music at like the Borgata, and I love that. Because these people in the audience are getting a whole different feel than being in a stadium. And the other thing is, which I will never do again, I would walk through a crowd of 100,000 people to get to the front of the house, right? I'd come out of the backstage and walk through going to front of house. Now, of course, we know that if you're hanging around with 10 people, you're part of whatever ecosystem is going on. You're part of it. So I don't know if I'll ever do that again. I've had fans over the years that have come up to me and say, my mother died of cancer. My father is dying. I didn't think I could continue living. And then I heard them do this song. And you realize that you're a part of that unbelievable magic, that a song takes somebody from being at the depth of despair and gives them hope. I try to tell people, that's what music does. It can take you to a place, and I'm sure you have your go-to music when you wake up and it's going to be a shit day. I have my couple songs that no matter what happens, they let me breathe again. And music is an amazing thing. And I have seen people in a crowd at a stadium, and John will sing Bed of Roses, and they're weeping. And I know for a fact that all the other people standing around them have faded away. They're having a one-on-one moment with that performer, with that narrative and that music. And that narrative is taking them someplace. That's the last magic on this planet, is music. You want to build a house, you go get plans, and you open it up. I need 2x10s, 2x6s, plywood. You write a song, you sit at a piano, there's 88 notes. What's the first chord? What's the first melody that you sing in there? What's the first word that goes with that melody? This is magic. This is just magic. You can't, there's no way to cut it down to say, oh, well, you put this on first. It's not making a Whopper. You know what I mean? It's not like, well, here's a bun, here's the meat, and I know you put pickles. This is truly magic. And what it does for people, it moves people. It makes them happy. It makes them sad. It makes them think. And what else does that?
I know. And where does that come from? It's just like, I didn't do that. It's
yeah. Yeah. I mean, let me ask you a question. So I'll tell you what. There's those things that change your life. And when the first Beatle album came out, I was like, oh, this is something. There was a couple songs during my life, especially when I was young. The first time I heard The Times Are Changing, Bob Dylan, the acoustic version, I knew he was talking about me and my friends because we were the next up to bat. Then the Beatles came out. I mean, I loved Elvis. I loved Little Richard. I loved so many records. But the Beatles came out, and I went, this is mine. This is my generation. This is mine. We get to own this one. And then when the first time, February 1964, I saw them at Ed Sullivan, I knew I was not going to pay attention to one more class than I was going to. I knew what the path was. I'm like, I don't need algebra to do what I want to do. I mean, that was a terrible thing to do, but I took so many music because I was a drummer, and I didn't feel very smart musically because I didn't understand chords. I didn't understand theory. And then I met the man who taught me about music at Springfield High School, Lou Del Negro. He wanted everyone to be a complete musician. And he taught you, because I took all my free classes in his, I was in the marching band, I was in the orchestra, but I took every theory and harmony course I could take with him. And that's where I learned to play piano, that's where I learned to play guitar, and that's where I learned a lot about the construct of music. And he never slagged popular music. He would take Beatles songs and say, I love this progression, but listen to this. Here's Bach, this invention. And you hear how close it is to, and you would go, oh man, he opened your eyes to the world musically. And I think everybody who does what we do has had one or two people like that in their orbit who have opened their eyes to things.
Yeah, it's true. And, in my case, it was my father who, played in the Philadelphia Orchestra. And for most of my formative years, I didn't really hear any popular music. I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan and stuff, but he didn't like recorded music, so we didn't have facilities really to play anything. And it wasn't until I got to high school. You went to Springfield, I went to Haverford. We're adjacent
Yes.
school districts.
Yep.
And the big advantage for me at my high school was it had an FM broadcast station. And we did a lot of recording. We had Ampex tape machines. We had RCA mics. It was really well equipped.
Wow.
It was,
in high school.
Yeah, it was amazing. I'll have to tell you more about that someday.
Wow. We had mono Wallen sax. Remember them?
Oh, yeah, sure. And it was actually, when I was in high school, I started working at WPEN as an engineer. And eventually, I just said, school's not going to teach me anything else that's going to be of any value to me. And I just stopped. And at WPEN, there was a talk show at night. And one of the guests, who'd been there quite a few times, was Jim Croce. You remember Jim Croce?
Oh, sure. Great songwriter.
Great songwriter, great voice.
Don't pull on Lone Ranger's mask, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And he and I got to be pretty good friends. And one night he came in and he had this reel-to-reel tape. And I guess he didn't have anything to play it on at home or something. And he says, I just got this from Capitol, because that was his label he was on. And he said, this is the new Beatles album. And what I heard was amazing to me, and it's going to change music. And you know what album that was. That was Sgt. Pepper.
Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah, and he had this pre-release tape of it, and I made a copy of it. It was mono because that was the real version of it. All their stuff pretty much was mono in those days.
Yeah.
When I first heard it, it was like, this is just too strange. I had trouble understanding it. And, but I wasn't going to let it conquer me. I was going to figure it out. And so I listened to that over and over and over and over again. So that was really my first real introduction to popular music, because prior to that, my exposure had all been to classical music. So it was a good place to start.
That's a really great place to start. And, like I tell these young artists, they want to ask me about all these pop artists. And they said, well, you don't like pop music? And I said, listen, I was the biggest fan of a pop band when I was young. It was the Beatles. That was a pop band. But they all played. They played. They looked at one another. They got up on stage with no monitors and played. And were amazing. You know what? We lived through the best time. Stax Records, Motown, all the great British invasion stuff, the Rolling Stones, the Zombies, the Beatles. You could go on and on. And radio was so diverse back then. You would have black and white artists interchangeable on the radio. You got to hear R&B. You got to hear rock. It was just a great, great time. I mean, I remember the first time I saw Otis Redding, and you just went, wow. Or James Brown. What is this? You go, holy. Do you know the Tammy concert that they did? And I have it here on DVD, and it's like Chuck Berry starts the show, and it's Gary and the Pacemakers, but James Brown comes out, and you just go, who are the poor bastards that have to follow this? And it was the Rolling Stones. And the Rolling Stones come out, and they're jumping around like they are insane. Because, they were sitting in the wings going, thanks a lot. We're following James Brown, and he was just on fire. And the bands were so great. Otis Redding's band, Even on a crappy TV show, he would play live. He would play live. If there's a bad note or somebody clams, that's a live performance. That's just what it is. Anymore you watch whatever and you go, well, are they live, or is it just, are they lip syncing it, or has everything been repaired to the maximum? I don't know.
I know, but in the 60s, I was working at WPEN in Philadelphia, and at night the station would sign off, and their FM signal was on the same frequency as WNEW in New York.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and when WPEN FM signed off, I could listen to WNEW on my way home in the middle of the night. And it was like every night there was something I had never heard before. And that was, sort of created my whole attitude towards music, which has always been, and, my friends and the people I work with are sick of hearing it, but I always say, play me something I haven't heard before.
Yeah.
And it comes from that era when you heard something you never heard before every single day.
Well, I'm not a technical. You're a very technical guy as well as a very musical guy. I'm not a technical guy, and I don't like when the technology gets in the way of the art form.
Right.
And it does. It does. You have to download this bundle because you have to put the decapitator on every vocal now, because I don't really want to do that. But, technology shouldn't wag the dog. You have to be aware of everything, and you have to be listening to every microphone. Did something just take a crap there? Is this level too high? Is this distorting? Are we overdriving the compressor? It's a lot to pay attention to when you have a big session. The new Bon Jovi record, John's like, I want to record this where we can all see one another, and I want everybody to play together. And I tried to get back into the power station, but they were doing that huge refit of everything. And I called them and I said, can you give me 2.5 weeks? And they're like, man, I'd love to, but stuff is apart. And I end up going to Ocean Way in Nashville, which it's an old church. So it's a large live room. And I wanted that for the drums, but we were able to set everyone up in this big circle so everybody's looking at one another. And it's great. And you hear it on the tracks. And John Shanks produced that record. And, he was part of it. He was like, yeah, you make everybody comfortable. Everybody got a say in it to how it should go. And it's a pleasurable experience. Also, they have that giant Neve down there. The thing is like, you got to take a cab to get from one end to the other. And yeah, hey, you have any Neumann 47s? Yeah, we got like 30. How many you want? You go, okay. It's the same as Blackbird. You go to Blackbird, and I love John McBride. One, he loves the Beatles. Everything is Beatles there. But you go into his mic closet, and your knees get weak. I have never seen anything like that. And I remember the first time I recorded down there, I'll tell you what I set up for my room mics. I had two 251s, I had two Fairchilds, and I was using a Telefunken V76 mic pre. And I'm just like totaling up how much I have in 2 room mics. I could have gone out and bought a couple really nice cars for what I had there. And you just go, well, this is silly. I tell the assistant there, I don't like the sound of this, Leslie. Do you have any others? He goes, I think we have 10. That's an amazing thing. That doesn't happen that much anymore. And Nashville, I started going down to Nashville all the time. And there's studios down there where it's magic. The Sound Emporium. It's been there since 1969. And they have a smaller B room with an API console in it. I am in love with this room. I have cut so many things in there, just in the smaller of their two rooms. They have a very nice large room. And you know what it is? The attitude's just different. The people who work in there, they work with you. Like I call them, I go, look, I got a young broke artist. I need to cut rhythm tracks. Can I come in on an off day? Can I come in at night? And they accommodate you because, like us, they love the art of making music. It's not just how much money can I get for every hour that I have the lights on. And I love that. I just love that. And, and you hate to see some of the studios over the years that they just close, and studios are closing left and right. The pandemic certainly didn't help any. I think recording in general is alive and well.
This is the end of the first part of my conversation with musician, songwriter, engineer, and producer Obie O'Brien. We will continue in part 2 coming soon. As always, thanks for sharing this podcast with your friends and colleagues. And you can always reach me at dwfern@dwfern.com with your comments, questions, and suggestions. This is my take on music recording. I'm Doug Fern. See you next time.